Hi, everyone. As you know, Beth, Liston, physician and state legislator. I'm here to teach you guys more about advocacy for public health, specifically state-level advocacy. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how a bill becomes a law, and we're going to start off with a concept and a video that I think probably most people are familiar with, but it really actually fits, and it stood the test of time. So let's take a moment to do that, and I'll set it up. Because some of the concepts are simple and some of them are not. And this goes through it in a way that I think reminds us of the simple ones, and then we'll talk through some of the more complicated ones. So unlike the other videos sometimes I've shown, we are going to watch the entire 3 minutes, but I think it'll be worth it.
Woo. You sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
All right. So as I said, oldie but a goodie, lots of important concepts in there. That was talking about the federal government, but the same is true of states in a similar process, certainly in Ohio. And when we talk about veto, we're talking about the governor, not the president, but you get the idea. So the basic concept is that someone has an idea and wants to change something in the law. Now, as you can imagine, that doesn't always start with a person who has a perfectly thought out concept and policy, and they know exactly what they want to fix and where the line is in the Ohio Revised Code to do it. So there's a lot of support for a person who has an idea to make it into an actual bill. And sometimes the idea comes from the person, sometimes it comes from a constituent, a lot of times it comes from someone who has a personal experience with an issue and is an advocate, or has a lot of public health knowledge and can be an advocate to meet with their legislator and bring that idea forward. But once the legislator has an idea that they're interested in moving forward with, they need to make sure it actually fits into the law. Many legislators aren't lawmakers, and I would argue that we don't want them all to be lawyers. We don't want only lawyers that are impacting the laws, because obviously the laws are so broad and you need different perspectives in order to really know how the law affects groups and real people. So in Ohio, we have a nonpartisan group called the Legislative Services Commission, and Ohio has a really great service commission, Legislative Service Commission. We call it LSC. It's won awards nationally. And they're the ones that will put all of these ideas into the legal language and make sure that any part of the law that would need to be changed to reflect the idea and or change would also be changed, so that it's consistent throughout the entire legal code and not just piecemeal. And once the legislator has this idea and a bill that they've had drafted by the LSC, they can send it out for a co-sponsor. And what this means is they're basically asking all other lawmakers, hey, this is my idea, this is my plan. Anybody else want to put their name on it as a supporter? A lot of times people email me or call me and they want me to co-sponsor a bill, but there's only a couple of times that you can do that in Ohio. One is when the bill is first introduced. So it's a little tough for some bills to put your name on it early, because a lot of times the bills will change. There's a bill last General Assembly that had absolutely nothing to do with failing schools. There were some schools that were struggling, had bad scores on their state report card, and a legislator had an idea about how he thought a state non-school individual could come in and change the district as the CEO, like a business approach to schools. And this wasn't a concept that was vetted through the entire process, but instead added at the very end of a process to a bill that was unrelated. And the people who had actually sponsored the bill didn't like it, and in the end, there was a lot of people who had put their name as co-sponsors on it, had to go back and have it removed, which is much harder to do. So there's always a risk in putting yourself as a co-sponsor to a bill early on. You have to know that that's the bill that's most likely to pass through. Once the bill has its co-sponsors, the person who's the primary sponsor will submit it to the clerk, and it's considered to be introduced. It's given a number, and you can search for it, and we're going to search for some bills, and you can kind of see how that works. Once it has a number, the first place it stops is a committee called Rules and Reference. And it's a little bit as boring as it sounds. This committee doesn't hear from people about the bills. They just take all of the bills that are that are introduced, and assign them to a committee. So it might be assigned to House Health Committee or Senate Health and Human Services and Medicaid Committee. Those are the two main committees that deal with health-related bills. But they're not the only committees that deal with health-related bills. Anything that deals with health insurance might get assigned to insurance. Sometimes bills get assigned simply because of the chairperson on the committee. So currently in the Ohio House, Scott Lips, Representative Lips, is the chair of the Ohio House Health Committee. But if he introduces a bill, it can't get referred to his committee. That's the practice, and so it might get referred to a different one. Sometimes bills are referred to other committees because they don't want the person referring it doesn't want the people in that committee to be the ones questioning it. So there are some committees that get all the different types of bills. Federalism sounds like is a committee in the Ohio House. It sounds like kind of a vague constitutional committee, but it actually deals with all the gun legislation. But everyone in that committee is used to hearing gun legislation. Occasionally, a gun bill might be assigned to a different committee just because they want a different approach, or they think that the members on that committee might be more amenable to that particular bill. So there's a lot of even politics at this point in terms of where the bill goes for their hearings. But that's the original process. And then once they're assigned to a subject committee, that's the place where they'll get to be heard by the lawmakers. Will get to come in and talk about it, what's called giving testimony, if you have something to say about a bill, whether it's for or against, or even just, hey, I'm interested and I want to tell you more about it. I don't feel strongly either way, but I think it's important that you know about this bill. So here are the standing committees in the House. You can go to, again, legislature.ohio.gov, and you can find these. These are the standing committees in the Senate. And here's the whole process once the bill is assigned. So as I mentioned before, every bill that's introduced before June of the second General Assembly will have a hearing. If you don't get it in by June of the second GA, so basically the first 18 months of the 2-year cycle, the bill isn't guaranteed to have even one hearing. Once assigned to a committee, the committee chair decides when hearings occur. So they can decide immediately, hey, I think this bill is super important. I think we need to have hearings, right away, and put it on the calendar for the next time a committee meets. They have to publish the calendar at least 24 hours before so that people have some notice that a bill is going to have a hearing. But they could also, on the opposite side, say, hey, I don't want this bill to move at all, and delay hearings until the very, very end of the General Assembly. They're required to have one if you get it in on time, but that might be the only hearing that that bill ever gets if the chair of the committee is not interested in the bill moving forward. The first hearing is usually just the person who introduces the bill. It's called sponsor testimony. So if I introduce a bill and I want to explain why it's important, right now I have a bill on insulin. I want to cap the out-of-pocket costs for a month's supply of insulin. Right now, insulin prices have been skyrocketing and there are a lot of people that can't afford it. And obviously from a public health perspective, that's of concern. From a physician perspective, that's a concern. So I have a bill to do that. And I had the opportunity to give sponsor testimony to the health committee. But I haven't had the second hearing. And the second hearing is when everyone who is for the bill, typically, will come in and give their perspective. They'll give numbers and facts and data. They'll also give stories about why it's so important, about someone whose lives were affected, about perhaps a family member that had a bad outcome, or someone that died because they didn't have, in this case, insulin that they needed. And so that's the second hearing. It's typically for proponents, people who are pro the bill. The third hearing is typically for opponents. And then if there are a lot of other people that want to speak on the bill, they may have more hearings. At any point after that, actually at any point really after that first hearing, there could be a vote, but that also needs to be listed beforehand on the committee schedule so that people know if there's going to be a vote. The chair decides when the votes happen. Obviously, if there's a huge outcry and lots and lots of people want to speak about the bill because they're upset and they feel like, hey, this is going to harm people, there are often more committee hearings to enable them to have a voice and speak to the bill. All right, if the bill passes out of committee, it then has to go to the entire body. So you heard the bill on the Schoolhouse Rock talk about favorable reporting. That's the term that says the committee recommends that the bill passes. It reports on the bill favorably. So the subject committee says, yes, we think it should be passed by voting in the committee, and then it has to go to the whole legislative body, either the House or the Senate. And everyone in that legislative body has to vote, and people have the opportunity to talk about it. They have the opportunity to amend it, both in committee and on the floor. And then they vote, and if it passes, it starts all over again on the other side. Obviously, if it started in the House, it has to go to the Senate. If it started in the Senate, it has to go to the House. And all of these places, there can be people changing the language of the bill or adding different components to it. The bill goes then to the governor. The governor has 10 days to sign it, or he can choose to veto. If he vetoes the bill, the chambers, the legislative body, can choose to override the veto. So in Ohio, it's a 3/5 majority in the House and the Senate. So both chambers have to have that much support to override the governor's veto. And then in 90 days, the bill becomes law, unless there's an emergency clause, which can be added to the bill, which says, hey, this is an emergency, we need to have this happen right away. That's rare, and it requires 2/3, I believe, in the Ohio House. 2/3 of the legislators to vote for it is not just a simple majority. But that's not that common. So that's the process. Kind of simple, kind of complicated. It has features of both. Well, let's talk about one specific bill that has some public health implications that has been in the news recently. So right now we're in the 133rd General Assembly, and Senate Bill 55 has been in discussion. So this is Senate Bill 55, and what I pulled for you was something called as introduced. Right? This is the bill that Senator Gavarone had that idea about, had it drafted by a Legislative Services Commission, and then had it introduced. And as you can see, it's about penalties for drug trafficking offenses if it happens near an addiction services provider. So the concept is trying to make sure that people who are seeking treatment for addiction don't have people who are selling drugs and trafficking drugs right around their their safe place that they're getting treatment. And it makes it similar to what the penalties would be if there was someone selling drugs at a school. Now, I'm going to mention this again, and we're going to go to this site so that you can see real time what it looks like to do some of the searches. And I think the searches are really the important part of this, to be able to go and look up some of the bills that relate to public health. So let's go to www.legislature.ohio.gov. And there's a lot of things here. Last lecture, we talked about finding your representative. Here, we're going to look a little bit at legislation. You can search legislation of any sort, and you can search it by which General Assembly it was introduced in. You can search it by keyword. You can search it by number. So we know that this is Senate Bill 55. And if we do that, we'll get that here. Senate Bill 55, enhanced penalties for drug offenses near addiction services providers. And it's as enrolled, so this will tell you where it stays in the whole process. You can see there's other bills that have a 55. There's a resolution in the Senate, and then there's a House bill, and there's a House resolution. So if we click on that bill, they'll give you a lot of information. Here's Senator Gavarone. She's the one who introduced it. Here's the list of all the people that co-sponsored it. And I mentioned the co-sponsoring process. I said you can co-sponsor a bill when it's introduced. You can also co-sponsor a bill when it has a vote. So if it's voted on in committee and you're in committee, you can add your name after the vote as a co-sponsor. And if it's in the entire chamber, whether it's in the House or the Senate, you can add your name after the vote as a co-sponsor. So this bill has gone pretty far. You saw it was as enrolled, which means it's gone through both the House and the Senate. And so these weren't necessarily all people who supported it at the beginning, but they may have added their name at that committee vote, or they may have added their name at the House or Senate vote. Okay, so a lot of stuff up here. There are documents. The legislative text is all the legal words. So these tend to be big, hard to read, but probably worth spending a little bit of time playing with. Click around so you can see what it looks like. There's a way it's done. It'll underline things that are new, and you'll be able to see what's crossed out. And then here's the analysis. So for every bill, the Legislative Services Commission also creates a plain language analysis. So not everyone has to read through the specific code in order to understand what the actual effect of the law would be. They also have a fiscal note, which is the monetary effect. So if there's a cost to it or there's an impact on revenue, the LSC does an analysis and puts this fiscal note. And as you can see, they have different analyses because it may change. So there's an as introduced version, and then there's an as enrolled version. So as enrolled, this bill, oops, so I grabbed the legalese bill, component, but you could go through, we should go to the analysis and look at as enrolled, and you'll see there's a new part to it. It says would have reduced penalties for violating Department of Health and local Board of Health orders that relate to pandemic diseases. Okay, so it started off as a bill just about drug trafficking penalties near addiction centers. And here it is at the end of its process saying, we're also gonna make sure that the Department of Health can't enforce strong penalties for not following the rules right now during the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's look at that process a little bit. Said you can look at status. We said it's as enrolled. You can actually kind of go through the history of the bill under here. So it was introduced in the Senate and in February of 2019. It was referred to the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee reported a substitute bill. So there was some language changed. And then it went to the whole Senate. The Senate passed it. Then it went over to the House pretty quick, less than a week. The House took it up. Sometimes they don't. The House may never take up bills that the Senate passed. It's often a negotiation between the House and the Senate, which bills will be taken up by the other House. Sometimes a bill could be amazing in the one House, but if there's not support in the other, then it may never actually move anywhere, even if it goes through one chamber. But it was introduced and referred to committee, criminal justice. It was reported out of criminal justice and with recommended passage, right, to the House floor. In May, it was passed and amended. And this is actually where the amendment was added. So the bills now became the slightly different in that it said, hey, we can't enforce penalties for not listening to what the governor is saying for coronavirus. You can look at votes. You can see the Senate, it originally passed pretty unanimously, not completely, 9-1 from the committee, 31-2 from the Senate. The House committee was 12-0. And then remember, it went back to the House total chamber, and this is where it was amended. And obviously there was a lot of people then who weren't in support of the bill. And then the Senate, it had to go back to the Senate because there was a change since the last time it had been into the Senate, and they agreed with the amendment and passed it, although it was much closer than it had been. If you want to see the details of that, you can go into the committee activity, and you can actually see all of those meetings, right? So here's the first Senate Judiciary Committee first hearing, where the sponsor, Senator Gavarone, testified as a proponent for her bill. And then the second hearing was on the 20th of March, and you can see all of the people that came out in favor of the bill. They all came and testified. You can download their testimony if you want. You can hit download and read what they had to say. And that's honestly really important. I do that a lot. I can't always watch all the committee hearings, but I really want to know who said what and why people were for the bill. So you can see that Dave Yost, who's the Attorney General, he was for this bill. But the third hearing, the opponent hearing, we had the ACLU coming and testifying against it. So you'd want to be able to read both and get those perspectives. And then there was actually a fourth hearing, and the vote happened at the fourth hearing. So someone else came to testify as well at that fourth hearing. In the House, kind of the same thing. First hearing was the sponsor. Second hearing, you have all of the different people that came for the bill and against the bill. They're pretty much the same people. We had someone actually act as an interested party And this is a group that has something to say about the bill and can provide some insight and expertise, but don't necessarily feel strongly about the bill, yay or nay. They're not coming out in one direction or the other. And then you can see, it did have that fourth hearing. Another opponent came, but it still passed. Now, you go back to documents, the one thing that I didn't scroll down to, because it's pretty unusual that it would exist, is there's a veto message associated with this bill. So after all of that, the governor did veto it, and it is because of that provision in the bill that says we can't enforce public health orders during the period of pandemic. And that's where the bill stands. So, the governor came out, he vetoed it, but that may not be where it ends. At any point when the House comes back into session or the Senate comes back into session, there's the ability for those chambers to override the governor's veto. Now, they're going to need a lot of votes, but it passed by a lot of votes. And they would have the supermajority needed to override that veto. So now what? We would say this is a place where many people in public health have the opportunity to advocate, to talk about why one might want to be able to enforce public health orders during the era of an uncontrolled pandemic where millions of people are dying. There are others, obviously, that feel strongly that that's not the role of the health department, that that's not the role of the government. And that's been the debate for the last couple of months, maybe 5 months, ever since we had coronavirus coming to our state. So hopefully everyone has a better sense of the process, bills becoming a law and what that looks like and ways to find out and follow so that you can get engaged and make sure that public health is a part of the conversation in important bills that really impact health in Ohio. So thanks, everybody.